I have attorney Ken Good on the line. Ken, you're also a bail bondsman out there or something in Texas, right?
Well, I represent bondsmen in Texas, and as a result, I'm a member of their board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, which is their association.
That's right. That's right. Well, there's a lot going on with this situation with inmates, and we're talking about public safety and conditions. I mean, I just had something to pop up on my screen right now that says Milwaukee transit drivers have been fired for exposing unsafe conditions. What are we dealing with here?
Well, I think we're dealing with a lot of unknowns and a lot of decisions that are being made very quickly without sufficient information. And sometimes we're making decisions that we're not thinking through. What are the ramifications that are going to happen? What are the consequences of that decision? Like 3 months from now when we're trying to pull our courts back together. And so we're dealing with, we're acting like this is, something like this has never happened before, but we have, the jails and county jails and prison systems are constantly fighting viruses and infections, and they have a long line of protocols they already have that they normally follow in this situation. It's just now, I think we have the perfect storm of some activists that are taking advantage of this and are pushing and almost bullying elected officials to say, you will do this or you'll just release people or we'll sue you.
And this is going to affect a lot of things with courts, with what they're doing. I know when we spoke with Sheriff Hall here, in a lot of cases, they are reducing some charges, and even those who had to report for like DUI for the week, the report in for the weekend, they're like saying, well, just for showing up, you get to go back home. So it's going to affect a lot of things with court and legal matters.
It sure is. I mean, if you can imagine, we've put courts on hold, but crime doesn't take a break, and so we've got an apex where the jails are saying we're not going to arrest people for certain charges, and we're telling offenders that, and then we've got pressure to release what they're calling low-level offenders, and so we're releasing people, telling them if you commit just these crimes, we won't rearrest you. And as the natural consequences of that, you're now seeing several weeks later, crime is inching up quickly all across the country, being led by domestic violence, which should have been predicted when you're telling people to stay in place with the person who actually happens to be your tormentor.
Some of this reminds me of, you remember when sometimes at school, I've seen it in the workplace before, where they have a pay what you can kind of set up. Let's say somebody puts a plate of a big basket of all kinds of candy bars up there in a basket in a public place, and they put a sign up that says pay what you can, and they have a can up there where you can put in whatever it is you feel you ought to pay for that candy bar. And it seems like we're creating that kind of scenario with some of the inmates. Courts have been deferring some arrests on a temporary basis, and it's almost like they expect the inmates to kind of come back and turn themselves in after this blows over.
I think that's a great analogy, because we've already seen in several large jurisdictions what is the ramifications of just releasing people. I mean, in New York, it was so bad that even during the pandemic, the legislature voted to roll back many of those changes. Here in Harris County in Texas, they're trying some reforms that are similar. We're just releasing people, and it almost makes your criminal justice system almost voluntary. Because if they just don't come to court, if they won't come to court, then they have to commit a new crime to bring them back into the system. And if it's a low-level crime, they just get released again and again and again. And so you almost end up having to discount crime, discount punishment. We'll give you a break. We won't give you as big a punishment as you normally get if you just come back. And that's what is causing this problems across the country.
Exactly. In case you just tuned in, we're speaking with attorney Ken Good. He's a noted Texas bail attorney and a board member of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. He's worked closely with lawmakers and other individuals on bail matters, and he's offering just some perspectives, giving us a better picture of who's supposed to be in charge of public safety, what they should consider before making these decisions, because the decisions to release inmates, decisions to defer cases and charges is not just affecting those charged with the crimes, but it is affecting all of us. I mean, how would you feel if, say the neighbors over behind you have a couple of sons over there who are kind of wayward, always into something, and you're relieved that they went to jail and now they're being released because of COVID-19. Now that affected the person who committed the crime and is affecting the family of the house that they're coming back to, but it also affects you because Junior's back in the neighborhood, so to speak. So
Well, and the newest information even makes it more scary than that, because 4 states heavily tested their prison populations, and they found out of over 3,000 people who tested positive for the coronavirus, 96% had no symptoms. So if we're releasing large numbers of people out of the jail or the prison, even on a temporary basis, are we releasing carriers of the coronavirus out into society because they don't even know that they have it because they're symptom-free? That's the risk that we're now carrying.
You said a mouthful there. That is a risk. I mean, here I know that at the county jail they have pallets of gloves and a special sanitizer because it's been eye-opening for me. Some sanitizers have enough alcohol content in it, so they have to order a special hand sanitizer because it can be used to make drugs or some alcoholic something. So,
well, that's a good point too. Jails have special protocols they have to follow. I mean, they're always fighting a tuberculosis outbreak, or they're often fighting that or a measles outbreak. And, during the flu season, even a really bad flu season, we may close the schools, but we've never closed the jails before. This is the first time in our history where, we've had activists go to counties and say, you're going to release these inmates or we're going to sue you. And in many cases, they have been sued. And, we've had hearing after hearing in Texas. The Court of Criminal Appeals refused to release people. The Supreme Court refused to order people to release. But we had to go through the litigation of all of that, even addressing it in federal courts during the middle of a pandemic. So you can see why counties are just saying, look, we don't have time to mess with this issue, so we're just going to release people. And again, it is a short-sighted decision, which is going to have serious ramifications in the future.
Well, I'm sitting here wondering what message that sends out to a drug addict or any type of predator or someone who is abusing their wife and family. What message that sends to them that says, well, they don't have anywhere to put me right now because they're pretty much not doing a lot of arrests.
Well, I'll tell you what the statistics are showing. The statistics are showing that they are getting the message that they're getting a get-out-of-jail-free card and so they can do whatever they want.
I perhaps so. I mean, the domestic violence shelter, when this COVID-19 broke out, their calls went up 55%, according to their CEO. So it is.
Well, that's across the world. We're seeing that. We're seeing empty hotels being taken over and used as domestic violence shelters for people who don't have any place to go because their only option is to go back to where their tormentor is.
That's sad. And that's one of the challenges, as I mentioned earlier, that's one of the challenges that they're having to deal with. There's a hodgepodge of things going on. You got situations where you're letting them out, and I don't know that whether or not any questions are being asked about housing. Where are they going to go to live? Because if they've been in there a while, I mean, things change. Where are they going to live? And if is anybody checking to see, are they going back to the home of a person that was instrumental in them getting in there? Are they going to be seek revenge? I mean, it's kind of out there, but it's a reality.
No, that's a very good point. We've had situations in our area where people, they're just releasing people and they're not even checking to see if they have somewhere to go. And in one situation, the officers, the jail was telling the person, if you don't have anywhere to go and you're homeless, well, then we are advising homeless to abide by the social distancing requirements. I mean, it's almost comical. There's another guy who was arrested 36 minutes or 37 minutes after release. He was arrested carjacking, attempting to hijack a car. I mean, it's almost like he needed a ride to go somewhere. It is just a terrible situation. And we need to be looking at, even if we just looked individually at people to make these discretionary decisions, it might have slowed down the process, but they would have been smarter, better decisions than these carte blanche releases without even checking to see if people had somewhere to go.
In case you just tuned in, I'm speaking with attorney Ken Good, and you had a book out related to bail reform.
Well, I have a book called Goods on Bail, which is a practice guide for people who, yes, for people in Texas dealing with bail issues.
Let's talk a little bit about how this bail thing normally works when there's not a coronavirus. Give us the basic tip sheet, the basic summary about how this bail thing works.
Well, normally when someone is accused of a crime, they're arrested. They're brought before a magistrate. They look to see what crime he's accused of, and they set bail. And in Texas, there's a statute specifically addressing what factors they have to set out. That's probably uniform across many jurisdictions.
Right.
And everybody has a right to bail with sufficient sureties. And then the job of the magistrate is to determine what the bail amount should be, sufficiently high enough to ensure they'll come back to court. Also taking into consideration that if they're claiming poverty, it's not meant to prevent them from getting out of jail. And so based on those factors, they determine what bail should be. And then afterwards, after bail is set, then the courts can determine whether they should be considered for a PR bond. Some of the largest jurisdictions, largest counties like Nashville, that area, they might have a bail schedule so that as many people who can possibly get out of jail without going, into the jail, so that's a way to divert people as quickly as possible to process a large number of people out of the jail. And then that leaves for the courts to concentrate on the people who cannot afford the bail set by the schedule, and for them to ask for deviations. It allows the court more time to exercise its discretion. And then the purpose of bail is to allow you to be out of jail as your criminal case is being prosecuted. It is bail is security with the court.
Security with the court. I like that.
To promise that you will appear whenever the court requires you to appear. The problem we're having with some of these advocates for reform is they are focusing on one small issue dealing with bail, and that is how do we ensure that we don't take advantage or forget poor people who are in jail, and they're trying to make that the focus. The problem is if you make that the focus, then how do you process large numbers of people to the jail very quickly in our largest areas? And the result is, like California and New York, you're just going to release them. You're just going to release everybody. And the problem is that creates chaos. So we have to make sure that we set up procedures to protect and make sure we don't forget them. But that's not the issue. The issue is how do you process large numbers of people through the jail efficiently and effectively to ensure they come back for court.
Is that the biggest issue among the issues that they're facing? Because I know that a lot of bail attorneys are probably contacting you or looking to you for advice about how this new abnormal is going to be with dealing with this bail issue. So what are you hearing from them? What are their concerns?
Well, the concerns that we have or that we're seeing is how are people going to get back to court? I mean, when the courts open back up, when they start having hearings again, how are we going to get criminals who've been arrested and who've been just released, how are we going to get them to come back into the system? We know that if they're just given a PR bond, then they have a 50% failure to appear rate, and that is huge. That has a huge impact and does great damage to the court. So if you have 1,000 cases set for a week, that means you've got 500 that you have to reschedule. The next week, you've now got your 1,000 plus 500 more. And if you have a 50% failure to appear rate again, you've now got 750 cases to reschedule plus your 1,000 from your week. That's why in Harris County, they've seen their numbers of pending cases double in the last year. And so we can't, those systems are built to cause collapse and cause chaos. And that's the worry, that this is going to actually accelerate that process. And so we have to come up with better ideas, better ways of getting people to court. And it's really building off what has worked for over 200 years in the past.
So there is a roadmap, that they could...
Yes, absolutely, there's a roadmap of what's worked in the past. There's 4 different ways that people have been magistrated or let out of jail historically. One is just individual magistration. Works great, completely complies with the Constitution. It's not cost effective in our large counties. So in our large counties, do you do just simple release? We know that doesn't work. We know that causes chaos, so take that one away. Then we haven't talked about risk assessment. But some of our groups proposing reform have been proposing risk assessments for the last 3 years. That's collapsed in the last 8 months. Studies have come out saying don't use, that they're terrible, and the largest digital companies in the world have said don't use them. And so then the other option is a bail schedule, a reasonable bail schedule with protections to make sure we don't forget about or take advantage of the poor. Those are the things that have worked and have worked historically. The problem is our friends on the other side just think that it's just not right, that we've historically taken advantage of certain segments of the community. And my response to this, there are a lot of social ills. We've got we've got inner city crime, we've got drug issues, we've got failing families, dropout rates. But the problem is bail reform the place to address that? And I don't think so. I think all bail does is get people to court.
Wow. Now that right there is something worth marinating on. That last comment, that's something worth marinating on. Is bail reform the solution to this hodgepodge of a mess?
That's right, and it's not. I think I could make a very strong argument that it's not the place. We should be addressing those things long before they come to court. And when they come to court, that's the last chance.
But Ken, you got grandmothers, you got mothers calling the prison system, and they're crying on the phone and saying, my loved one, he's an inmate and he's been behind bars, and they're crammed into these places. They can't social distance. They don't have places to, they're sharing everything, showers and dining spaces, and it's just not fair. What's your comeback to that? Because it is a reality.
Yes, ma'am, it is a reality, and we have to make our decisions on whether to exercise discretion there on an individual basis, not on a group basis. And we need to protect people, but we don't, are we going to ignore public safety at the expense of just making an emotional decision? I think the problem that I'm saying, the problem that I think is we've gone too far, is we're making knee-jerk decisions without thinking through the ramifications of them. And so we're making wholesale decisions for criminal justice on a phone call of a family member saying, I don't want to take a chance. And the problem is we're willing to risk that they may already have the coronavirus and be part of the 96% without symptoms. And we may be dispersing them into the family to expose all of them. And so we should not be making decisions on stuff we don't know. We should be making decisions on what we do know.
Well, as of last month, more than 231 inmates and 223 staff members have been infected at the Rikers Island Jail Complex in New York. Meanwhile, 134 detainees tested positive in Illinois' Cook County Jail. The virus, as they anticipated, once it got there, it has spread like wildfire through many of the prisons, and the number of confirmed cases just continues to rise, and correctional facilities are releasing incarcerated inmates early to try and reduce the size of their population. Now, U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr ordered the federal prison system to release some elderly or sick people instead of keeping them in overcrowded penitentiaries. So, I mean, how dangerous could they be, Ken?
Well, Washington State, the Supreme Court had a hearing, or they issued an opinion at 5-4 on whether to release some elderly inmates. Some of them included a serial killer. And so they fell short by one vote on a 5-4 basis to order his release. The problem is we start out with, we're going to only release low-level criminals, nobody dangerous. And then it gets to the point where we start releasing everyone, which is what we're seeing. Is we're going to just release everybody. And these are elderly people. These are people who are susceptible and who have a vulnerability towards the virus. And then you say, well, then where do you stop? And we're making decisions based solely on one set of parameters, and we're not making decisions that include public safety. I mean, we just have public safety aside. You've got people who are accused of crimes and they get taken to the jail and they cough and the jail refuses to take them. But at the same time, we're telling people who are at the beach that if they don't disperse, they're going to be taken to the same jail and they will not be released. I mean, we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. And it's because we're not using logic. We're not thinking through what we're saying. I mean, can you imagine taking a 90-year-old person who's sitting on the beach to the jail? That would be the worst thing you do. But we've got reports in the news just over the weekend where, they were told that if they didn't get off the beach, that they would be taken to the jail. We're making decisions not based upon logic, not based upon criminal justice issues. We're basing them on solely, in my opinion, on medical science that we don't know what the answers are.
Well, this certainly has, again, created a hodgepodge of a mess, because there is no prison manual on how to handle pandemics and inmates and bail and courts and this kind of thing. And I would think that it's placing a huge burden on the budgets, because you obviously would need extra people to set up an ample system of checks and balances to monitor this stuff. You got to have somebody to check to see, okay, who can we release? And after you do that, you still need somebody to check on them on a daily basis to see, or at least a weekly basis, or have them to check in, and somebody to answer the phone to take down that account of how are they doing? Are they living right? Are they doing the right things? Are they putting anybody at risk? Then you got to have somebody else to follow up with the court cases and to keep, it's a lot. You see how crazy this gets?
Well, I think one of the things that I think people don't realize is what's driving this is we have, on one side of the spectrum, we have, the advocates for reform bullying elected officials. But on the side of the elected officials, this is a pandemic where the people who get really sick need a ventilator for 2 weeks almost. And so can you imagine the county paying for people to be on a ventilator 2 or weeks or more from a prison? That would be a great cost for the medical expenses for the county, for people in the jail. And so I think you see those two extremes coming together, and that's why I think you see a lot of people being released from the jail. They're being pushed to do it from one side, and the other side they have this fear of untold medical expenses that they do not want to incur.
Well said. In case you just tuned in, you're listening to Your Turn, and I'm speaking with attorney Ken Good. And we're talking about the concerns related to inmates, releases, and public safety. The coronavirus cases continue to rise in America's jail. Some states have instituted early release, but a lot of advocates say that's not enough. The U.S. has the largest incarcerated population in the world, probably over 2.3 million people who are crammed into facilities where they cannot social distance. And we're talking a lot about the inmates, but we also haven't dealt with the issue of the officers who have to work in those jails and the families who have to figure out how to navigate this new normal with these inmates back at home in the house. We got to pause here for a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Ken more about this and find out what might be some possible solutions and a little bit more about what he's hearing from bail attorneys who consider him an expert and are looking for answers. You stay right there. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. You still there? We're still here. I'm speaking with attorney Ken Good. You've represented a lot of bail. Can we just call you a bail reform advocate?
Well, I don't know if I would say advocate. I think I am responding to a lot of what the bail reform advocates are proposing. We have our own ideas on how to improve the system, but I would think the reform advocates would say I stand against what they want to do.
All right. Attorney Good has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, including the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. And he authored a book called Goods on Bail, and it's a practice guide created for bail industry professionals. And he's written a lot of articles. One of them was What Successful Bail Reform Looks Like. What's successful bail reform going to look like now with this coronavirus?
Well, I think we need to start with assessing people when they're arrested. We need to assess them to see if they can be diverted away from the criminal justice system, like mental issues, drug courts. And also I think we need to have reasonable bail schedules to get as many people to post bond that can afford it, so that the courts can concentrate their time and limited resources on the people that are left. What we're seeing is when you just have blanket determination, then you have these issues where you have people commit new crimes. What we need to do is divert as many people out of the system as we can, find ways to deal with them, and then allow the court its time to concentrate on what's left. And that's where we need to get better at the system. And then we need to figure out a way to track who's in jail better, especially pre-conviction. The examples that we've had in our area where people were forgotten or lost in jail is because they weren't following existing law. And so we have to do a better job of tracking those people who are in jail. You shouldn't be in jail longer than any sentence that you could ever receive pre-conviction. And we need to prevent that.
Well, we definitely have a situation. Jail officials are trying to stop the spread of the coronavirus throughout the prisons, and so they can also protect the officers as well as the inmates. And it has sparked a lot of debate over public health versus public safety. And that's what we've been talking about. And there have been some inconsistent outcomes. In some cases, the inmates are thankful, those who get to go home and try to turn their lives around. But in other cases, there are some where, even here locally, we had someone where the family, the wife, the kids, they were calling saying, hey, come get this guy. He's starting to drink again. And we know what happens behind all of that because, you know, as you and I both know, Ken, a lot of people who have been inmates, they have drug problems with alcohol. And then we haven't even touched on the mental illness part because prisons have become babysitters for the mentally ill.
Well, some of our largest mental health facilities in the state in our area are the jails, and it's because that's the dropping point. That's the reform that needs to take place instead of bail reform. We need to be taking our mental health patients out of the jail because, and a lot of times they're not taking their medications. They get in trouble. They get arrested. They go to jail. They get on their medication. And they're fine again. It's just a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over. And again, when we're making carte blanche decisions and we're applying them to all, the court has no time to exercise and focus on these individual situations, and that's the real loss in criminal justice reform. That's the real tragedy.
And when you say that the court has no time to focus on these individual cases, so when someone comes across past the judge, they don't have time to look into the case to say, well, this guy was abused as a child and he became an abuser and he's struggling with alcoholism, and also he was diagnosed with a mental illness. He's bipolar, and they don't have time for that. They look at the crime that was committed and they just process them?
Well, especially at the initial magistration, if you're just making carte blanche decisions and it's just releasing everybody, then you don't get to look at this person individually, see what his problem is. You're not setting bail based on his individual factors. You're just releasing everyone. So you're releasing the good guys and the bad guys based on the crime. And the people that need help, you're not looking to see what you can do to help them. You're just releasing them. In Harris County, as long as it's for a certain number of crimes, you never even see a magistrate. So no one ever even sees that you need help. You're just released. And that's the real tragedy of this situation.
You mentioned, we had talked a little bit earlier about people of color. And stats have shown that in a lot of cases, people of color bear the brunt of injustices within the justice system. So how has that factored into what you know and what you're hearing from bail reform attorneys?
Well, the first thing I'm hearing is that people who've tried reforms and who've made changes according to what our friends on the other side are demanding, the jail populations, the percentages have not changed. In fact, in New Jersey, which is probably the best example of the state that our friends on the other side said to use risk assessments, and now they're completely out of favor, have found that the jail population percentages along racial lines did not change as a result of the reform. So they now consider New Jersey an example of a failed state. I question whether the issue is bigger than that. Is the issue really, is it just a racial issue, or do we have an inner city crime problem? Because any other, segments, or there's large segments of other populations that have abandoned the inner cities, and we've been left with people who can't abandon them. And schools have failed, dropout rates increased, crime has increased, drug use has skyrocketed, and there's no opportunity for jobs. And so are we really just facing, and I know there's some commentators that have said, what this is a inner city drug issue, and we've failed our citizens in the inner cities. My point is, again, is bail reform the place to address that when all we do is get people to court? We should be addressing that all the time. We should be addressing that, how do we get families to stay together? We're not doing that. We're not even trying. And now we're saying, let's give them a pass. Let's give them a get-out-of-jail-free card, which, in my opinion, makes the situation even worse, because we're telling them, now we're not going to punish you for committing crimes.
And there's a lot of mixed reaction to this. Some experts on this issue are kind of in conflict about what is the optimal approach in a given state or municipality for how to handle this. Do you go soft on crime, or do you call the police and say, hey, write less tickets, write less tickets, stop arresting people? Do you release prisoners who are locked up on minor charges because they couldn't come up with bail anyway? Prisoners are on the cusp of finishing their sentences. Bill Barr, the U.S. Attorney General, said that at-risk inmates who are nonviolent and pose minimal likelihood of recidivism and who might be safer serving their sentences in home confinement, let those people out. So,
but notice what he's saying. He's saying, let's use our discretion individually. Let's make a determination on a case-by-case basis. That's where we're seeing the problem, is we're seeing counties not do that. They're doing across-the-board decisions, And then if that doesn't meet the goals that they need or that advocates have set for them, then they're even raising it higher and releasing what everyone would agree historically is a dangerous criminal. And that's the problem we're seeing is counties are not exercising case-by-case discretion. They're just doing carte blanche releases, and that's what's causing problems.
I think another problem, too, is you have, it's the nature of humans. We all have opinions, and you know what they say about that. But you have some people who are not taking the coronavirus serious. You have some who are taking a wait-and-see approach. There was a situation, U.S. Attorney Bill McSwain, and he's a critic of criminal justice reform. And he asserted that the Philadelphia jail had no confirmed COVID-19 cases. This was near the end of March. And he counseled a wait-and-see type approach and said if we have signs, then we'll do the isolation. Visits to the prison have been cut off. And so there should be no problem. But the problem is the inmates are there. They're not going anywhere. But there are workers, officers going in and out. And he was wrong. The virus spread, some by those who are asymptomatic. Again, those people who are not showing signs. And by the time the signs actually manifested, it was too late. So, you have that going on. So it's just, I don't know, as you say, I think you hit it on the head when you said that they can't do carte blanche releases, but still there's got to be some gatekeeper, somebody to decide who goes where and to do their due diligence to find out where are they going. Is this a guy who abuses women, and are we sending him back to his wife and kids? I mean, these are things we need to know.
Well, and and some of these things require more time from criminal justice than less. And so, I mean, we've got terrible situations. We got a quick amount of time, and we have to make a decision. And we see that the decisions are being made that will have consequences for months and maybe even years to follow. And I would argue that carte blanche decision versus case-by-case discretion will be one of the most fundamental mistakes that has ever been made in the criminal justice system. Because carte blanche, we're releasing people over and over and again who should never have been released. And they commit new crimes to be released, They're taking advantage of the system. If we just used our discretion on a case-by-case basis, then we would, either that would not be happening or be happening on a very limited basis. But that would also require more isolation, more organization in the jails, and that's not being done.
Let's talk about this guy in Harris County, his situation.
There's a guy named Timothy Singleton. He's kind of the poster child for what goes wrong when you just release people, when you have a carte blanche release. He was arrested during the COVID-19 crisis for accused of pulling out a gun on an aunt, and he was set bond at $500, and then he had substantial criminal history before that, and then again he was arrested after he was released, and he was accused of a very substantial crime, including beating up someone.
Okay, I see it now. I've got the record piece here. This is in Texas, and Timothy Singleton is 31 years old, and he's a man who beat his ex-girlfriend and threw her grandmother to the ground. And 2 weeks after he was released from jail on a low bond after being arrested for a violent crime, he has a warrant out for his arrest. And I'm trying to see the date of this report. This was April 16th. So at his first court appearance at the end of March, before a magistrate, he had and Karen Barney and the prosecutor, they had a heated exchange about the bond amount. Now, the prosecutor, Karen Barney, requested a $50,000 bond based on his criminal history. But the magistrate explained that COVID-19 concerns in the jail were driving her decisions, but it doesn't say what she wanted to do for the bond.
She said a $500 bond.
Okay.
And
$500?
yes, and the DA requested a $50,000, and it was a heated exchange. The judge was, the DA was saying, we've got to, this guy has proven that he's just going to commit more crimes, so we can't give him discretion. And the trial court saying, no, you just want to fill up the jail with the COVID-19. I'm setting a low bond. And so the DA did something I don't know if I've ever seen before. They went to the Court of Criminal Appeals under this little-known section of the statute, which is our highest court for criminal cases, and asked them to step in and raise the bond. And that's what the court did. Even though they were only asking for a $50,000 bond, the Court of Criminal Appeals set the bond at $100,000, cash or surety, no PR bond. It's almost like them saying, Harris County, you've gone too far.
Well, there was another little guy, Quaron Pope. He was released by way of this emergency order in their efforts to thin out the jail system. And he was one of a dozen people accused of nonviolent crimes with nonviolent histories who were released on April 3rd. A couple of days later, this guy was back in jail, charged with a car break-in and stealing IDs and bank account numbers from 3 people. And these are crimes for which he was previously convicted. So I guess that basically sends a message that if you went to jail for stealing people's credit cards and you get out, the likelihood is strong that you're going to be back in jail for stealing people's credit cards because you didn't serve your time for what you did before. There's no, I guess the jail, when they put you out there, as you say, carte blanche, there's no training course or support group waiting for you to sign up for and to make sure you show up for and be held accountable to try and treat yourself. So if someone has an addiction to something and you let them out and there's nobody to stop you, we're back to my scenario that I mentioned earlier where you put the candy bar jar on the table and say, pay what you can.
That's right. Even Mayor de Blasio was reporting recently as saying, it was unconscionable that people who were released because we were showing them kindness, that they would come back and slap us in the face and be arrested on new crimes. And, it's almost like he was shocked. But if you check people's criminal histories and they have an extensive criminal history and they're currently in jail for something similar, I don't know why you would expect that would change by releasing them pursuant to the COVID-19. It's like saying, go forth and do it again because we're not going to arrest you. I mean, there was the Harris County mayor, his remedy was to tell criminals to cool it for a couple of weeks. Well, they're not going to cool it if they have an extensive criminal history. And we have the records to know which people that this applies to, and they should have never been released from jail in the first place.
Sad situation. The question that the ACLU is asking says, if COVID-19 does not discriminate, then why are Black people dying at higher rates? And they're looking at the inmate population, but I don't know that they could truly make that argument when it comes to the jail population. Of course, we know that stats show that in many jails, the stats show that there are more Blacks there or more people of color in prison. But I don't know that we could argue that they are being mistreated over any other inmate in terms of these releases. Do you have any numbers or have you heard any conversation about that?
Well, I have a little bit, and just probably this morning. So, there's an article out talking about that if you just take New York and its surrounding 2 states, which is New Jersey and Connecticut, and couple that with our nursing home population, that accounts for a large number of our fatalities for the COVID-19. So the issue is, and I saw another article comparing the COVID-19 to some of the pandemics that we've had in the past, like the Black Plague, which had a large mortality rate on young adults, which is different than we've seen with other pandemics, and especially this one. This one does not seem to affect young people or very newborns, as much as it affects people who are elderly or people who have respiratory issues. And, I have a sister who has a brain injury who lives in an assisted living facility, and they're on lockdown. And I think that those are really the proper actions to take as our people who are most vulnerable. And I question whether we're overreacting on people who the majority, it looks like in our jail population that haven't, don't even realize they're asymptomatic. So we're making decisions based upon less than 1% of the population. And I don't know of anyone in any jail that's been, that's had significant complications at this point. But again, I would point out, county, that's their worst fear, as having to pay for those complications. And I understand that.
Well, this has really been eye-opening for me, because at one point I thought, why don't they just do a lockdown like they're doing the nursing homes? But again, that doesn't work because, they're in close quarters. But blacks do make up more than half the prison population in states like Illinois, Louisiana, Michigan, Maryland, and those are all states reporting higher rates of spikes in the number of black people testing positive for COVID-19. And again, it's the overcrowding and the lack of soap. But I mean, just like in the nursing homes, the inmates aren't going anywhere. So it has to be being brought in.
Yes, I agree with that. I think look, there's new people being brought into the jail every day. And
well, there's that, yeah.
But what about, let me say this. If the county or the government can't run the jail and they can't protect the inmates in the jail, then don't we have a bigger problem about the government not being able to do anything? The government can take care of people in jail. They've done it in past pandemics, H1N1. We've had other pandemics in the not too recent past where we had large fatalities and we did not close down jails. We didn't have large releases of people from jail. This one is different because of two things. Number one, we now have this large group of advocates for change on the other side, almost bullying our elected officials. And on the other extreme, this pandemic, the major complication is pneumonia that requires a ventilator, and counties do not want to pay for substantial medical expenses for someone for a couple of weeks. And so those two things have led to the perfect storm of a release for large numbers of people across the board without exercising individual discretion.
Well, I just know that there needs to be some sort of checklist put in place. They need to provide free testing and treatment for the entire inmate population. They need to be forthcoming with the public about what those numbers are, instead of telling the public at times that, we don't have any cases or we have a few cases, but we're working on it. I mean, they need to do the testing. They need to release the numbers to the public. They need to, and maybe I'm wondering if they deal with re-entry barriers by ending punitive criminal background screens for housing, employment, and public benefits. And then those returning home from prison and jail, start to think about things that they're going to need: housing, employment, health care. Because if it were one of us, for some reason we were in jail and we got out and we had nowhere to stay, nothing to eat, we're going to do what we know how to do to survive. We're going to steal something. You see where I'm going with this? I mean, when they do this carte blanche release and provide them with nothing, not saying that they're responsible for it, but if you put somebody out there who has no way to eat, nowhere to live, no way to survive, nobody's going to hire them.
Well, I think that goes to the very heart of the issue. Is, we need to do a top-down bottom, separate apart from the COVID-19 virus, over what is a crime in this country. And then whatever we decide is a crime, then those are crimes that we have to regulate. Now, a lot of the issues that you're talking about, lost opportunity, all those issues go to punishment. I don't think they go to whether you committed a crime or not. It goes to punishment. But the problem is we have some career criminals, some career low-level criminals.
Yes.
And those people who are gaming the system, they know that's their job, that's what they plan to do, whether it's a COVID-19 crisis or not. And the problem is, it's costly and it's expensive to house those people in jail. And we're getting to the point where we want to look for alternatives. There are some people that there are no alternatives. The problem that we have is we want to make a carte blanche decision so that we can't be accused of exercising discretion, favoring one side or another, or any group over another. And that's what's causing this problem.
Well, should we impose a moratorium on low-level arrests, low-risk arrests, a moratorium on court fines and fees and related penalties, including like driver's license suspensions? Should we do that? Would you support that?
I think, you know what I would support? I would support something along the lines of first-time offenders. If you don't have a criminal history and you're arrested for something, I think those should be, especially during the pandemic, should be one area. And what you've got to remember is just releasing them creates another whole set of problems on the other end, and that is, how do we get them back to court? I mean, you'd be better off, and you'd be in no worse shape if you just said, okay, you're released, go get a surety bond and take it to the jail in the next 3 days. If they don't do it, you're no worse off. But if they do it, then you've got a 500% better chance they'll show up for court when you set it for court in 6 months. And so I would say that you've got to look at one of those decisions. I think first-time offenders should be one thing. But if you've got a criminal history, I don't care what you're arrested for. If you've got a lengthy criminal history, I don't care what you're arrested for. I don't think you should fall into it. We're just going to release you without seeing a magistrate.
Very good points. Very good points. Attorney Ken Good, thank you so much for taking time to share with us here on Your Turn. Any closing comment?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You were so wonderful, and I enjoyed every bit of it.